So Mikaël Toulza is a PhD candidate at the University Toulouse Jaurès, working under the supervision of Hélène, Charlery and David Roche. His dissertation is entitled Le Vaudou dans les fictions audio-visuelles nord-américaines de 1932 à aujourd'hui, Représentation, identité, subversion. And in his thesis, he seeks to interrogate the political implications of the representation of Louisiana Voodoo in American cinema and television through an intersectional approach.
Exactly. Thank you very much for the presentation. And also thank you, Georges-Claude and Kevin, for inviting me to the conference. I'm really happy to be the only Southerner here today.
I was going to say Southern's a state of mind.
I know.
So Mikaël is going to talk of voodoo and the limits of Whitesplaining and Jezebel.
Okay, is it working? Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. In an article about intersectionality and German feminism, Beverly Weber notes that, and I quote, discussions of intersectionality have been hesitant to engage faith and religion other than occasionally list religion as one in the list of relevant differences. Yet religion is also a central component of one's identity and thus requires attention in any study of identity politics. In what follows, I analyze how even a particularly sensationalistic representation of a religion such as Voodoo interacts with racial and gender stereotypes to ultimately complexify the discourse on Southern identity. Set in rural Louisiana, Kevin Greutert's Voodoo-themed horror movie Jezebel, released in 2014, follows Jessie, a white young woman who, after a car crash, ends up in a wheelchair and is forced to move back in with her estranged father, Leon. There, she finds videotapes in which her mother, Kate, who passed away when Jessie was a few months old, gives her daughter tarot readings warning her of an unwanted presence in the house. Jessie's investigation on the paranormal presence leads her to the discovery that her mother learned how to read tarot thanks to her African-American voodoo practitioner friend, Moses, with whom it is revealed in a final twist, sorry, spoiler alert, she also had a love affair and a child named Jezebel. After she was born, Leon, unable to bear the thought of his wife cheating on him, murdered both Moses and the biracial baby. White Jessie is exposed as a usurper, a child who was adopted to cover up her father's crime. The film, which centers on Jessie's typically white perspective, depicts voodoo as evil and dangerous. I want to argue that the way Jezebel resorts to a gimmicky form of voodoo is symptomatic of the treatment of otherness in popular representations of the American South, meaning they tend to be explained through the hegemonic group's perspective to appeal to a wider audience. In an article entitled Black Religion and Black Magic, Joseph Murphy argues that much of voodoo's enduring appeal lies in its ability to displace white guilt and perverse libidinal energies onto blacks. Originating in the minds of the writers and the viewers, these feelings are, through the Hollywood magic of voodoo, transferred onto voodooists. Because it is presented from white Jessie's unreliable perspective, voodoo becomes a weapon in a racial revenge narrative. Jezebel's construction as a black female monster appears to be means to assuage Jessie's and the spectator's white guilt. The white-splaining of Jezebel's experience, that of a mixed-race baby born out of adultery to a redneck-like father, calls for an oppositional perspective in the vein of that theorized by bell hooks. For Jezebel, voodoo is the only way to reclaim the life she was stolen. In other words, the movie's exploration of voodoo exposes, on an allegorical mode, the outcomes of the South's racial history and its ongoing effects on gender, racial, and regional inequalities. Jessie's, Kate's, and Jezebel's views of voodoo are integrated in the first scene the religion appears in. It is a dream scene Jessie makes after her abusive father, under the influence of alcohol, throws her wheelchair in the swamp, thus furthering her inability to move. And there it is. start again.
Past your bedtime, sweetie.
The dream scene marks the very first appearance of the black body on screen, as well as its instantaneous categorization as a voodooist. Many motifs that have been associated with on-screen representations of voodoo are reprised. In terms of sounds, a faint death rattle can be heard over the lullaby the mother is singing in the video. The narrative quickly shows a doctor blessing Jessie's doppelganger, so Jezebel's face, with a chicken leg dripping in blood, as well as a black male crouching in front of a veve drawn on the floor. Veves are voodoo symbols used either for protection or to summon the loi, the voodoo spirits, during ceremonies. Because the veve is surrounded by burning candles, which create a gloomy and dreamy atmosphere, there is no doubt that this man is performing a voodoo ritual. Combined with the tapes showing Jessie's mother, Kate, this dream triggers Jessie's identity quest. The scene is filled with what the final twist will prove to have been clues. It starts with a tape of Kate singing a lullaby to a baby, which is, at least the first time around, presumably Jessie. Kate displays motherly behavior as she gently touches Jessie's forehead as a mother would to comfort her child. In the background, a music box is playing in reverse, already suggesting that the answer to the mystery lies in Jessie's childhood. The past, the present, and the future are, just like intersectional identities, entangled, and references to childhood mingle with Jessie's present condition and the future-telling tarot cards imbued with voodoo magic. As with Alan Parker's Angel Heart, voodoo is the catalyst for the entangling of a mystery that heavily relies on the protagonist's deceptive eye. The movie's reliance on internal focalization gives the viewer insight on Jessie's fear. In the dream, the narrations play on pace through the gradual increase of rapid cuts. It's designed to communicate Jessie's helplessness and vulnerability to the audience. Jessie's experience of voodoo is quite literally a nightmarish one. She is unable to move and tied to a hospital bed. In a pure classical voodoo zombie movie fashion, a white damsel in distress in a white gown is endangered by the actions of black males who eventually try to suffocate her with some black liquid coming out of an oxygen mask. Her anxiety towards voodoo and black male bodies is associated with the traumatic experiences of losing a baby, a partner, and the use of her legs after a car crash, as well as the heavy surgery she had to undergo, which are evoked by the hospital bed and the operating table. The trauma she experiences at the beginning of the movie gradually turns into a traumatic experience of voodoo. The hospital bed on wheels is reminiscent of Jessie's wheelchair, both inscribed in the wider motif of stasis. Frequently pushed by other characters, Jessie is the passive victim of their decisions. Her temporary disability does not seem to complexify her identity from an intersectional perspective, but represents a mere narrative conceit to limit her mobility. The twists and turns in the narrative rely on Jessie's resistance to stillness, be it hers or the South's. She withstands both her own inability to move and the Southern conservative mindsets. When her father, a Cajun man overtly constructed along the lines of the redneck stereotypes, forbids her to watch more tape, Jessie barely listens to what she is told and does it anyway. Similarly, she is warned by her former high school lover about how dangerous voodoo could be. Instead of running away, Jessie makes the choice to keep on investigating. And her choice underlines the kind of woman she embodies. Had she run away, she would have been a weak or reasonable woman, but she stays and is defined by her decision-making abilities and assert her, albeit limited if considered through an intersectional perspective, feminist stance. Eventually, she's led to the revelation that all she is an imposter. She's a white woman who indirectly stole a whole life from a black woman, and she does not even know it. The film shifts from gender to race in this respect. The unreliability of the white perspective at the heart of the movie's narration goes hand in hand with the exposition of Jessie's privilege, that of white people not acknowledging or not being taught what their ancestors have taken away from African Americans. In turn, these people cannot see the effects of this abject racial past on current society. Jessie's fear of voodoo acts as a way of reminding both this middle-class Southern woman and the viewer that her whole past, and to a further extent Louisiana's past, was shaped by race relations. In a Freudian fashion often explored in horror movies, the dream reveals the unconscious, while the monstrous acts as a return of the repressed, in this case, white guilt. During the dream scene, a childish piece of music makes way for a heartbeat, recalling Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart, in which the eponymous organ acts as an indicator of the narrator's guilt. In Jezebel, this internalized guilt turns out to be that of the protagonist, who unwittingly usurped the place of a mixed-race baby. The beating heart slowly turns into ceremonial percussions, punctuated by both a song that signals an African-derived religious ceremony and a sort of kayako-like death rattle, hence foreshadowing the centrality of voodoo in Jessie's self-discovery. The white protagonist's fear of voodoo stands for her fear and ignorance of the South's violent past. The more Jessie learns about the past, the more concrete it becomes through Jezebel's bodily manifestations that you can't really see here. I'm sorry for the quality of the image. Like Samara in The Ring, the baby who was killed has grown up, wears a long white gown, uses her long dark hair to cover her face, and is basically out for blood. Jessie's final unveiling of Leon's abject act, however, leads to the restoration of Jezebel's physical appearance. Like Louisiana's past, she's no longer monstrous because she's not the real monster. The white man is. The African-American ghost's revenge sheds light on a reciprocal relation between Jezebel's take on white guilt and its Louisianan setting. White guilt of racist acts fills the landscape with ghosts, and in turn, it is because of these ghosts' presence that Jessie is haunted by their history in a very Southern Gothic fashion. The movie relies on the premise that the South's past, pinned on the monstrous behavior of a white redneck-like Southerner, has to be exorcised in order to assuage white guilt. From what is shown in the tapes, Leon is a middle-class Cajun man who owns a former plantation house in the bayou and used to make enough money to hire African-American servants. In post-Katrina Louisiana, though, his financial situation has evolved and he's not as wealthy as he used to be. Given Cajun people's Catholicism and Louisiana's location in the region also known as the Bible Belt, he's probably a fervent believer as well. Thus, it is highly ironic that he's confronted to racialized versions of biblical characters Moses, a voodoo prophet who leads Kate to be a fervent voodoo practitioner, and Jezebel, born of adultery in the Bible and later associated with false prophets. Moses and Jezebel could make Kate happy when Leon could not. As such, they embody Louisiana's cultural miscegenation, and their relationship contests the rules of hegemonic white masculinity. Leon makes the abject decision of shooting Moses and murdering the baby by suffocating, then dumping her in the swamp, replacing her with a white one. This decision could be explained by another tape, which shows a happy Leon announcing his wife's pregnancy to a lot of his friends. But had they seen the baby, Leon's friends would have known he was made cuckold by a black man, and adultery and miscegenation would have led to gossip in Louisiana's socially conservative backlands. More than just a critique of hegemonic masculine behaviors in a Southern context, Leon's murder exposed a community's influence on one's behavior and identity. Black masculinity, as well as both black and white femininity, are the victims of the excesses of insecure, toxic white masculinity and Southern conservative ideology. The movie's final twist interestingly echoes what Janelle Hobson, drawing on Toni Morrison's ideas, calls viewing in the dark, meaning paying attention not just on the visual, but also on the unseen and the unheard Africanist presence in the film. The twist unveils the unseen and unheard presence of baby Jezebel throughout the movie. It exposes the black presence underlying American culture and history, so often unacknowledged by white people. In the end, the black woman's experience is only discussed by white characters, meaning the black past is whitesplained and calls for the oppositional reading the narration would not give us. The dream scene relies on the theme of duality to hint at Jessie and Jezebel's connection. Shots featuring mirrors, a classic Gothic and noir trope, are scattered throughout the movie and in the dream to hint at Jessie's flawed identity. Jessie's double, who, as it turns out, is the real Jezebel, is on an operating table and being drained out of her blood, symbolizing her soul, only to be re-injected in Jessie's body through the oxygen mask. Jezebel is everything Jessie's not, that is to say, the dead offspring of actual love between a white middle-class woman and a poor black man. The black liquid's attempt at penetrating a white space, Jessie's body, is one of the movie's central motifs. Yet another classical Gothic convention featured in the Japanese ghost movies that influenced Jezebel. I'm thinking of Darkwater and The Grudge, for instance. Jezebel's ghost is helped by her mother, Kate. Throughout the movie, Kate's ghost lures Jessie into being possessed. As such, Kate, the white mother of a mixed-race child, appropriates a figure typical of African and Native American traditions, the trickster. Jezebel relies on the idea that Kate can appropriate an African-American figure because she's with a black man. Symbolically, then, she's also appropriating blackness. About the movie The Skeleton Key, Camilla L. Martin writes that the figure of the trickster is culturally benevolent as it forces the audience to see through the oppositional gaze. In turn, it alludes to a better understanding of the events experienced by the black characters. Yet, Jezebel's story is far from explicit and far from being explained. At the end of the movie, Jezebel uses Jessie, the white woman who de facto stole her identity, as a costume. By adopting this white body as disguise, the miscegenated woman who was at the margins of society becomes part of the hegemonic norm imposed by the white gaze. This racial passing is triggered by Jessie passing as Jezebel her whole life because of her father's past murders. The necessity for a black woman to resort to racial passing is thus justified by a white woman's appropriation of a black woman's identity, which could also be understood as her culture. But passing, the movie seems to suggest, is no longer desirable, let alone useful. Because of the reversal of identity, the white gaze is destabilized and the oppositional gaze becomes the one to adopt. The final horrific videotaped scenes punish both Jessie and the viewer for relying on the white gaze all along. The white gaze is temporarily destabilized, yet far from subverted. The gradual invasion turns into body snatching at the end of the movie. Jezebel, now in control of Jessie's body, leaves with the white man, while Voodoo heals the disabled body. Voodoo, if just for a moment, is reassociated with its historically benevolent purpose. As soon as Jezebel snatches Jessie's body, she is instantly sexualized and adopts a more lascivious attitude towards Jessie's high school lover, whom she passionately kisses. This double usurpation reveals the entrapment of the black subject in racist stereotypes. Jezebel is fully embracing the Jezebel's legacy, a traditionally racist and stereotypical figure associated with African American women, which has been perpetuated by popular representations since the post-Civil War period. The Jezebel is lascivious and lewd, meaning her body is made available to the white male gaze. Her dangerousness lies in her being also predatorily promiscuous. Throughout the movie, the stereotype is out of place, Jessie being a far from lascivious middle-class white Cajun woman. She does not fully embrace the cultural heritage her name bears and is called Jessie, the shortening of her name being less culturally racist and more of a white name, even though it taps into gender ambiguity. Following the codes of standardized visual representations, Jezebel's Jezebel is, in effect, a woman of color. Jezebel's past, whitesplained by Jessie and Kate, merely becomes a way for the movie to be deemed progressive. As a form of conclusion, the representation of voodoo in Jezebel, because it resorts to stereotypes about African Americans and to the popular belief that it is an evil religion, exploits it as a sensationalistic dramatic device. Voodoo's dangerous potential ensues from the narrative's reliance on the white protagonist's perspective, which taps into both the frontality of the horror genre and the fantastic's oniric atmosphere. In this white perspective, which combined with Kate's taped tarot readings, alludes to the tentative whitesplaining of the real Jezebel's experience. This gimmicky form of voodoo is a source of fear, all the more so as voodooist Jezebel is constructed along the lines of successful Japanese horror movies. Yet the movie hints at this religion's brighter side when controlled by the African-American character Jezebel, who manages to cure Jessie's body after she snatches it. This part is eerily reminiscent of Yane's softly 2005 The Skeleton Key, in which the white protagonist is trapped into being possessed by the spirit of Maman Cécile, a voodooist who's been snatching bodies for decades to pass as a white person. Just like Maman Cécile in The Skeleton Key, Jezebel's practice of voodoo to pass as a white person is not only a means to live freely, but also a way to compensate for past and present white abuse. The deceptiveness of Jessie's perception exposes the ambiguity of the movie's politics. It reveals that white women cannot understand the experiences of African American women. The movie also exposes toxic white masculinity and suggests that white women, and black males suffer from this hegemonic form of masculinity's stranglehold. The white patriarch is shown as the true monster. The monstrosity of white redneck masculinity puts forth the movie's stance on white guilt. The only way to reach the absolution of the sins of past abjection is to fully embrace this past. One of Jezebel's shortcomings in this respect lies in the fact that abjection is pinned on the murders of the monstrous patriarch, while all whites, especially Jessie, should be aware of society's racial past to avoid repeating it. Jessie's lack of sensitivity regarding the past is paralleled by the narrative, which reprises white cliches that express a certain anxiety towards voodoo and black bodies, such as Jezebel, the movie's title, overtly alludes to. Even though intersectionality has permeated popular culture, what Jezebel's treatment of voodoo ultimately shows is that stereotypes and racial anxiety die hard. An intersectional approach also testifies to how problematic a well-meaning film like Jezebel turns out to be, falling back on familiar stereotypes and the white tendency to appropriate other cultures. Thank you.